we'd like to welcome Hemal Patel, class of 1994, to the stage. He is a professor in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of California, San Diego. Please welcome Hemal.
Short, so I'll move the mic down. I want to start by thanking the organizers and the committee for this amazing opportunity and this honor. I also want to thank my family and friends who have contributed to my success over the years, and most importantly, my teachers and colleagues. And a few of them are sitting in the audience, and they've really made a huge impact in my life, and they've continued to be an impact. I continue to stay in touch with my Latin teacher from high school. We visited her this summer on our 6-week road trip with the kids. We did a 9,000-mile trek across the U.S., and we survived, and we're all alive and still married. So in reflecting about this award and thinking about sort of where my life has been and where it's headed, it's interesting to think about where I grew up and what happened, right? So I was born in India, moved to the U.S. when I was 6 years old. I had two parents that were very hardworking, and they taught us the importance of work ethic, and both my sister and I took this to heart and applied it to virtually everything we did in our lives. One memorable and important stop along this long journey that I've had has been Mundelein High School. I think one of the things that I discovered at Mundelein was my voice, and I was a very shy kid, right? I sort of cowered in an audience. I didn't speak up. I was always picked on when I was little, and in Mundelein, it sort of changed for me. I was an academically talented individual. I was able to do science and math very well, and in this confidence, I grew as an individual. I actually participated in sports. I enjoyed playing tennis, ran cross country and track, and this really gave me a lot of focus that then helped me succeed in college and beyond. I was a double major in college, biology for getting a paycheck and philosophy of religion because that's what I wanted to do. And so I was going to wax philosophically, but you can thank my wife for stopping that. And she said, during your talk, focus on something that brings you joy and sort of peace in your life. And one of the things that has always given me joy is my love of science. And so I'll start with the story. So I was sitting on UCSD's campus having a coffee with a student of mine who I've been mentoring for the past year in the post-bac program. She wanted to apply to medical school, and I'm a part of the admissions committee, so sort of good advice. And she made it, right? She'd gotten accepted to a number of medical schools and decided to accept her spot at UCSD and decided to come. And so Mallory and I were sitting at the coffee stand, and you can sit outside in California because it's warm all the time. The Santa Anas were blowing, so it was quite warm, so it was a little bit uncomfortable. It was almost 100 degrees and very dry weather. So instead of coffee, we were both having iced tea. As we were sitting, we'd gotten about 3 sentences through, and one of my colleagues came by, Paul Insel, who's been an amazing mentor to me in my career and my life. And he saw me, and we hadn't seen each other in about 2 months. We've both been at different parts of the world giving talks and presenting our science and stuff. And he made a beeline for me and sat down. And he carried on a 3-minute conversation without noticing that someone else was sitting at the table and completely ignored Mallory. He finally noticed that she was there, and he said hello and sort of said sorry to interrupt, and then he continued to interrupt for another 15 minutes. And we talked a lot about science and then a grant that we were going to put in together and working on. And so Paul leaves, and about 2 seconds later, Susan Taylor walks by and having coffee. She sees me and she walks over. Again, completely ignores Mallory. Talks science, focused on a grant that we're putting in together as well. And then as she's walking away, notices Mallory says hello, sorry, and then walks away. And so I apologize to Mallory for the social ineptness of my colleagues. And this is interesting about scientists. We have social inadequacies, I think. We spend a lot of time in our heads. And I think one of the big things about science was that you spend your entire world in your head trying to figure out ways to fix the world around you. And a lot of times we ignore things that happen around us because they're distractions, so we can focus on the bigger and better things to improve the world. And so that's what I've sort of trained my life to think about, to escape into my head, think about scientific problems and solve them and potentially make the world better. So my office at the VA hospital in San Diego, there's this giant whiteboard, and it's got a list of all the projects that we're working on in the lab. And when students walk into my office, they're just sort of blown away by what's on this board, and it's sort of intimidating to see everything that the lab works on. And it's a lab made up of amazing scientists and individuals, students, colleagues, my fellow faculty as well. And so I won't share with you the 50 projects we're working on, but I'll share with you one. And this really sort of is important in my life now because it culminates into the things that I've been doing with my science. And it makes me think about where some of the science is headed as well. So about a year and a half ago, I was contacted by a genomics group in Arizona, and they had sequenced a mutation in a young patient. She was 5 years old at the time, the age of our youngest, Olivia. And she had a devastating diagnosis. She had a primary mutation in a protein that my laboratory studies, and she has pulmonary hypertension, and she essentially has 5 years to live. And if she doesn't get a lung transplant, she will die. And so he called my lab, and this was sort of a weird, sort of hokey thing, like, why are you calling me? Why not call someone else who works on this protein? And it's amazing how circular and interesting and evolved the world of science is. One of my students who'd worked on this protein while she was in my lab was a medical student at the University of Arizona, and she had interacted with this individual. And she said, oh yeah, I know all about this caveolin protein. And she said, I worked with this guy at UCSD that's the world's expert on this. And so called me up and we started looking at this protein. And one of the things I think that scientists see is hope in the face of complete despair. And I've seen this at UCSD and a lot of my colleagues, where they see something terrible and then are able to take that information and apply it in a completely different way. And so we had this little girl's cells in our lab. We had her blood from her parents and siblings and family. And we started looking at her biology. And it was striking. This was something that we'd never seen. Her cells looked like we'd never seen under a microscope. And so she has this additional aspect other than pulmonary hypertension where she rapidly ages. So she's 5 years old, but she looks like she's 80 years old. And so she has what's called neonatal progeria. And what's unique about this is that her cells are an information catalog of this early rapid aging phenotype. And so this is very debilitating for her. And I'm in constant touch with her parents talking about her etiology, what's happening with her, how she's doing. And she's doing quite well right now. And in my mind, as I escaped one morning as I was driving to work, I had this interesting thought. I said, why, maybe this is something we can apply this in a completely different way. And so one disease that my lab has been focused on is cancer. And so cancer is a cell that never dies. It's rapidly non-aging. It's young all the time. And so we had this almost silly straw man hypothesis that we'd express this little girl's mutation in some cancers and see what would happen and see if it would stick. Interestingly, the preliminary results showed that in every cancer cell line we've tested, there's a complete progressive stop of cancer growth in these cell types. And so this is the amazing aspect of science, to take something that's potentially horrible and debilitating and to apply it in a completely different and abstract way to fix the world. And we're able to do this because we can escape into our minds and think about and apply things in very different ways. So science has been very comfortable for me. It's a place where in my mind I can escape and find peace and joy. A place that I can really reach out and make a positive impact in the world. My success in science is not possible without a series of strong teachers and mentors that I've had, many of whom I still stay in touch with. My thesis mentor we also saw in our 9,000 miles saga over the summer. He is happily retired in Louisville, Kentucky. He just had a hip transplant a week ago, and it's amazing to talk to Garrett. He's full of life and is still an amazing mentor and scientist even after he's left science. I've also had supportive family, especially my wife, who I met at Mundelein High School over 2 decades ago, and we've been happily married 18 years and have 3 amazing children. And I have to thank my 3 kids who have amazing inquisitive minds that keep me always active and they constantly challenge my patience, which is, I think in the end, makes me a better scientist. So I want to thank you all for listening and this opportunity, and I'm humbled and honored to receive this award. Thank you.